Imagine sitting in a courtroom, eyes locked on a judge, a group of police officers standing confidently at the front. The atmosphere is thick with tension. A trial is underway, and it seems like it's going to be just another case of a black person fighting for justice in a system stacked against them. The accused? A group of racist cops. The charge? Their actions, fueled by bias, have left behind a trail of hurt, discrimination, and injustice. The judge? He seems calm, almost indifferent, as he listens to the evidence, at least until a black woman stands up in the back of the room. The woman, calm but determined, makes her way to the front. She's not just any ordinary person. She's someone with an unshakable presence. A few murmurs ripple through the crowd as they realize who she is. Her name carries weight, and it's not because of her race. No, she's someone much more powerful than anyone in the courtroom could have imagined. She reveals something that changes everything. The room goes silent. Her eyes meet the judge's, and for the first time, there's a crack in his stoic demeanor. But let's rewind a little. Picture a scenario far less intense, yet equally profound. A young black teen is riding the bus one ordinary day, heading home. His day is like any other until he notices something unexpected. A pregnant white woman enters the bus, eyes scanning for an open seat. Without hesitation, this young man stands up, offering a seat to her. It's a simple gesture, but little does he know that what happens next will alter the course of his life forever. As the woman takes her seat, she looks at him with gratitude, but it's not just any thank you. She pulls out a piece of paper from her purse and hands it to him, a note that carries with it a life-changing message. A message so powerful, it could set him on a path he never imagined. The teen looks at the note, confused at first, but soon he begins to realize the weight of what he's holding in his hands. What could a pregnant stranger possibly have in store for him? The story of this teen and the mysterious note is one that you'll have to stay tuned to fully understand. But it's also tied to a much larger narrative, one that brings us back to that courtroom. How do these two seemingly separate events connect? What does this black woman, the head of CIA investigations, have to do with the cops and the pregnant woman? As the clock ticks, things unfold, and what you think you know about justice, power, and influence will completely change. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the truth is about to be revealed in a way you won't expect. Will the judge side with the racist cops, or will the revelation of this black woman's true identity turn the case on its head? And how does a simple act of kindness on a bus tie into everything? Stick with me to find out, because this story is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The courtroom remained eerily silent after the woman stepped forward, her every movement drawing the attention of everyone in the room. For a brief moment, even the cops seemed to sense something was about to change. They stood tall, their faces painted with arrogance and confidence, almost as if they knew they were in the clear. The judge, a man who had seen it all, barely raised an eyebrow as the black woman approached the stand. It was just another case, right? Just another day. But this wasn't like the other days. As the woman revealed her identity, something in the room shifted. The whispers that had once filled the space fell into a haunting quiet. The black woman wasn't just anyone. She was the head of CIA investigations, a position few people even knew existed, let alone the kind of power it carried. Her calm, yet authoritative voice pierced the silence as she addressed the judge. Her words were measured, but each one was loaded with weight and meaning. She wasn't just there to speak on behalf of justice. No, she was there because she had the kind of information that could change the entire course of the trial. The judge, who moments earlier had seemed impervious to the pleas and evidence laid before him, suddenly seemed small under the weight of her presence. His face, usually so composed, faltered just for an instant. That was all it took for her to seize the moment. She didn't raise her voice, but her words echoed with the kind of authority that made even the seasoned officers at the front of the room uneasy. "You may not know who I am," she began, addressing the judge, "but I know everything there is to know about this case. And what's more, I know more than you think about these officers." The tension in the room escalated. The police officers, who had been smug in their belief that they would walk away without consequences, exchanged nervous glances. For a moment, the atmosphere felt like a powder keg ready to explode. What could this woman possibly know? And why was she revealing it now? at such a crucial moment. Meanwhile, across town, the story of the young black teen continued to unfold in a way that no one could have predicted. His name was Malik, a 16-year-old high school student who had always tried to do the right thing. His friends thought he was a little too quiet, maybe a little too kind for someone living in a world so often full of harsh realities. But Malik never seemed to mind. He was used to standing out for his generosity and the way he always tried to make life a little easier for the people around him. He didn't think much of his decision to offer his seat to a pregnant woman on the bus. It was just what anyone would do. But as he sat down next to her, the woman's smile didn't just come from a place of politeness. There was something else in her eyes, something that spoke of an understanding far beyond the ordinary. When she handed him the note, Malik's hands were shaking, not from fear but from curiosity. He had no idea what was in that small folded piece of paper, but something told him that his life was about to change. As soon as the woman stepped off the bus, Malik unfolded the note. It wasn't a phone number or a simple thank you, as he'd expected. Instead, the note was a message, one that felt as if it was written just for him. It was cryptic, yet pointed, with words that seemed to speak directly to his deepest instincts. "You are needed," it said. "Your path is bigger than you know. Trust what you feel. Something important is about to unfold." He sat there for a moment, confused, but deep down, he felt a strange tug, an undeniable sense that this was a turning point in his life. He didn't know exactly how, but somehow, this woman knew something he didn't. And somehow, it had everything to do with what was happening in the courtroom right now. What was the connection between him, the woman, and the case of the corrupt cops? Malik couldn't yet understand, but the weight of that moment stayed with him long after the bus ride ended. He didn't talk about the note to anyone, not even his closest friends. There was something about it that felt too important, too significant to share just yet. Back in the courtroom, the black woman, who had now revealed herself as the head of CIA investigations, continued her quiet but powerful explanation. Her eyes locked with the judges, and for a moment, the rest of the room seemed to disappear. She wasn't just there to give a statement. She was there to change the course of everything. "You've been looking at this case from the wrong angle," she said, her voice unwavering. "The truth isn't just about what happened on that night. The truth is much deeper, much darker than you realize." The judge's eyes narrowed. He could feel the pressure building, but he wasn't ready to back down. His career, his reputation, his integrity, everything he had worked for was now being called into question. He was a man of principle, he thought. But this woman's presence, her words, made him second-guess his every decision. What did she know? What was she about to expose? Malik, on the other hand, was still grappling with the strange message he had received. The note, simple as it seemed, felt like the beginning of something much larger. He didn't understand why the woman had given it to him, but he knew one thing for sure: his life was about to change. The questions that were now forming in his mind about his connection to this mysterious woman only grew as the hours passed. Could she be involved with the case somehow? Was there more to this than a random encounter? The more he thought about it, the more his gut told him that the story unfolding before him in the courtroom had everything to do with him. But how? What role could a teen from a humble neighborhood possibly play in a case involving police corruption, CIA investigations, and the fate of powerful figures? The clock was ticking, and the answers weren't coming any faster. The more Malik tried to unravel the mystery, the more tangled it became. And then, just when he thought things couldn't get more complicated, another thought crossed his mind, one that shook him to his core. What if the woman wasn't just an ally? What if she was part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined? Something dangerous. Something that could not only change his life, but put him directly in the line of fire. For now, all he could do was wait. The story was unfolding, and the answers were still just out of reach. But one thing was certain: everything was about to collide in a way that no one could have seen coming. The weight of the courtroom hung heavy in the air as the woman, the head of CIA investigations, stood unwavering. The judge's gaze was still locked on her, as if trying to piece together the magnitude of her presence. His mind raced, torn between the desire to maintain control of the situation and the unsettling feeling that something far bigger was unfolding right before him. She continued to speak, each word like a soft yet piercing strike. "You've been so quick to protect the officers involved, but the truth is that they're part of something much larger. Their actions aren't just isolated incidents. They're connected to a network of corruption that reaches higher than you could ever imagine. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their expressions now betraying the confidence they once had. The courtroom was no longer just a place of judgment. It had become a battleground. As the woman's words sank in, it became clear that this case was far from ordinary. Her revelation echoed through the room, and for a moment, even the judge seemed unsure. What if the officers weren't just corrupt? What if they were entangled in something that could bring down the very system they had sworn to protect? The tension in the room was palpable, but the judge wasn't ready to accept it just yet. He had his own set of allegiances, his own way of doing things. He was an old hand at cases like these, but this was new territory. Meanwhile, across town, Malik's mind was far from the court. He couldn't stop thinking about the note. It wasn't just a casual message from a stranger anymore. It felt like a direct call to action, a challenge. The more he thought about the mysterious woman who had handed it to him, the more his heart raced. Who was she really? What was her true connection to everything that was happening? And most pressing of all, what did she want with him? His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from his older brother, Terrell. "You good," it read. Malik had kept quiet about the note, about everything he'd been feeling. He knew his family would worry. His brother, Terrell, had always looked out for him, and Malik didn't want to bring him into something that seemed so far out of his league. But there was something in the pit of his stomach telling him that the woman wasn't just offering words. She was offering something far more dangerous, something that would change everything for him. Malik sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the screen. The words he typed out felt like a confession. "I'm not sure, Terrell. Something weird happened today. I think I might be involved in something bigger than I thought." He hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He didn't know how much to say. How could he explain something that didn't make sense even to himself? Before he could send the message, another text came through. It wasn't from Terrell, but from an unknown number. Malik froze. He clicked on it, a chill creeping up his spine. "You're not alone," the message read. "We're watching. Stay alert. Don't trust anyone." His heart raced as a sudden fear gripped him. He looked out the window, his mind reeling. Who was watching him? And why did he feel like his life was spiraling into something he couldn't control? Back in the courtroom, the woman's words had sparked a ripple effect, stirring something deep inside the judge. His hands were no longer steady, and his mind seemed to race, questioning everything he had believed in up until that moment. His thoughts swirled around the officers, the corruption, and the mysterious woman who seemed to know too much. How had she gotten this information? And why hadn't she shared it with anyone else before? The black woman could see the judge struggling, his mask of control slipping away. She wasn't there to play by the usual rules. She was here to expose a system that had protected these officers for far too long. "I've watched them for months," she continued, her voice now laced with quiet intensity. "They've been involved in a string of illegal activities, everything from bribery to drug trafficking. But this isn't just about them. It's about the web they've spun, and it reaches far beyond the police department." The officers shifted nervously. One of them, Officer Reed, a tall man with a stern jaw, exchanged a glance with his partner, Officer Daniels. They had been confident before, but now they were visibly uneasy. Reed clenched his fists, his knuckles white. Daniels, who had been quiet throughout the trial, looked around, eyes darting nervously. There was something about the woman's words that seemed to ring true, but none of them could fathom what this meant for their futures. The judge, caught between duty and loyalty, shifted in his seat. He glanced at the prosecutor, a young man named Jameson, who had been so certain of the officer's innocence. Now, Jameson was silent, his face pale as he processed the gravity of the situation. Was this all a setup? Was this woman, this stranger, telling the truth? Or was she part of something more sinister? The room was charged with a heavy stillness, but outside, the world continued on, unaware of the storm brewing within those walls. Malik's thoughts swirled, now more tangled than ever. His phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from a news app. "Officer-involved corruption case takes a shocking turn," it read. He clicked on the headline, his heart sinking as he read through the article. The woman he had met on the bus, the one who had handed him that strange note, was no stranger to the case. In fact, she was the very reason the investigation had reached its boiling point. He had no idea what this meant for him, but it was clear now. The woman was connected to a much larger conspiracy. And whether he liked it or not, Malik had been drawn into it. The article ended with a chilling statement. Authorities are now questioning whether there are more officers involved in a network of corruption that has infiltrated the very heart of the city's justice system. Malik closed his phone, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on him. Was he part of the solution, or was he being pulled deeper into a situation that could consume him? The questions kept coming, but no answers seemed to surface. The clock was ticking, and the web of deceit was getting tighter by the second. He had no choice but to follow the trail. He just hoped that, in the end, it wouldn't be too late. Malik's mind raced as the weight of everything began to settle in. He had read the article again, his eyes scanning the same lines over and over, but each time, the words seemed to hit harder. The woman, the one who had passed him that note, was the one behind the investigation that had started the chain reaction. The corrupt cops, the mysterious network, and now his involvement, it all seemed too big, too dangerous. But he couldn't turn back now. The room felt smaller. Malik's phone buzzed again, and he hesitated before picking it up. It was another message, but this time it wasn't from the unknown number. It was from Terrell. "Malik, where are you? You've been acting weird all day. Talk to me." Malik stared at the message, his thoughts tangled in a web of fear and confusion. He could feel the walls closing in, and he had no idea who he could trust anymore. The whole situation felt like a bad dream that he couldn't wake up from. He glanced at the clock. He had to make a choice. The woman, the note, the cops, the judge, they were all part of something that was now in motion, and he was stuck in the middle of it. Back at the courthouse, the black woman continued to make her case. Her eyes were locked on the judge, and there was no mistaking the fire in her gaze. She was done with playing by the rules. The officers in the room were no longer standing with confidence. They were on edge, shifting nervously. Their once tight grip on the situation was slipping. Every word the woman spoke seemed to tear at the layers of corruption they had spent years hiding behind. "You know what I'm saying is true," she told the judge, her voice steady but powerful. "These officers aren't just a part of a few bad apples. They're the tip of the iceberg. The network they're involved in stretches far beyond what you're prepared to deal with." The judge's face tightened, his grip on the gavel tightening as he listened, but the tension in his eyes spoke volumes. He had spent years protecting his own interests, building a reputation for fairness in the courtroom. But now, everything was in question. And that's when it hit him, the realization that perhaps he had been part of the very system that was now crumbling around him. He glanced toward the officers, and for the first time, he noticed the way they were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Officer Reed was no longer sitting up straight. His hands were clenched tightly, his fingers white as he squeezed the edge of the table. Daniels, the quieter one, kept glancing over his shoulder, his eyes darting nervously around the room as if expecting someone, or something, to walk in and change everything. The room had become a pressure cooker, the heat rising with each passing second. The woman's words had done what they were meant to. They had cracked the thin veneer of control the judge had worked so hard to maintain. And now, the question was, what would he do with the truth that had been laid bare before him? Outside, Malik stood at the edge of a decision. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a message from Terrell, it was a call. He hesitated, knowing that whoever it was on the other end of the line could either make or break everything. He took a deep breath and answered. "Malik," the voice on the other end said, low and urgent. "I need you to listen carefully. You don't have much time. You're closer to this than you think. The woman who gave you that note, she's not just involved in this investigation. She's been watching you for a reason." Malik's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? Who is this? How do you know about the note?" "You need to trust me," the voice continued. "There are people who are pulling the strings on this whole thing, and you're caught in the middle of it. You've already seen too much. The cops, the CIA, it's all connected. And now, so are you." The line went dead. Malik's hands trembled as he stared at his phone. The weight of what he had just heard settled in, his breath shallow and uneven. Was this some kind of trap? Was he being set up? Or was the voice telling him the truth? He turned, looking around the empty street, as if expecting someone to step out from the shadows. But it was quiet, too quiet. For the first time, Malik felt the full weight of the situation pressing down on him. Whatever this was, it was bigger than he had imagined. And it wasn't just his life at stake anymore. It was everyone's. Back in the courthouse, the tension had reached its boiling point. The judge, now visibly sweating, looked to the prosecutor, Jameson, who had been silent the entire time. Jameson's eyes met his, filled with uncertainty. He had trusted these officers, believed in their innocence. But now, with the black woman's revelations hanging in the air, he wasn't so sure anymore. The woman continued, undeterred by the silence around her. The officers are just pawns, Judge. They're being used to shield something much larger, a system of manipulation and control that reaches into the highest levels of government. And you're a part of it. The words hit like a slap, and for a moment, the judge looked as if he might crumble under the weight of his own complicity. He had made countless decisions in his career, always believing he was doing the right thing. But now, as the room seemed to close in on him, he couldn't escape the truth that the woman had forced him to confront. Malik's thoughts continued to spiral. The words of the mysterious caller echoed in his mind. The woman, the note, the cops, it all felt connected, but how? And what did this mean for him? He had no idea who was pulling the strings, but it was clear that the answers were just out of reach. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Terrell. Malik, I'm coming over. Don't do anything stupid. But Malik was beyond the point of turning back. The final pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, and whether he liked it or not, he was about to be thrust into a game far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And the moment of reckoning was coming closer, drawing tighter with every passing second. Malik stood frozen, his phone still in his hand, staring at Terrell's message. Don't do anything stupid. The words felt like a warning, but they also felt like an ultimatum. He had been trying to make sense of the chaos swirling around him, but now, the danger felt much closer, much more personal. His brother, who had always been his protector, was about to walk right into the mess Malik was trying to navigate, and Malik had no idea if it was safe to let him. But before he could respond, a sudden, sharp noise broke through the stillness of the street. It was the unmistakable sound of tires screeching to a halt. Malik's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the source. A black SUV was parked just across the street, its engine still running, the windows tinted too dark to see inside. But something about it felt wrong. Too still, too deliberate. His instincts screamed at him to move, to get away, but his feet stayed planted, like he was frozen in place. And then the door of the SUV opened, slowly, the figure stepping out wearing a dark suit and sunglasses despite the dim light of evening. Malik's breath caught in his throat. It was a man, tall and imposing, his steps purposeful as he moved toward him. There was no mistaking the aura of authority about him, the kind of power that could make anyone feel small. Malik, the man said, his voice low and steady. We need to talk. Malik's pulse raced. He had no idea who this man was, but the way he said his name was far too familiar. The man didn't seem to be asking for permission. He was simply stating the fact that their conversation was inevitable. I don't know who you are, Malik started, his voice wavering despite his best attempt to stay calm. What do you want from me? The man didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, studying Malik with an intensity that made him feel exposed, vulnerable. Then, in a motion so fast Malik almost didn't see it, the man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a badge. It wasn't just any badge. Federal Investigator, the man said, his tone flat. I'm not here to hurt you, Malik. I'm here to protect you. But you need to come with me. Right now. Malik's mind reeled. Federal Investigator? Protect him? This was the last thing he expected to hear. The situation had gone from strange to completely surreal in a matter of minutes. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into a much larger and darker game than he had ever realized. But the woman, the CIA, Malik started, his words faltering. The man cut him off with a wave of his hand. Forget her. She's not who she says she is. You're in the middle of something much bigger. You've already seen too much, and now they're coming for you. Malik's thoughts were spinning. The woman, the note, the cops. Everything he had come to understand in the past few hours suddenly felt like it was slipping away, like a carefully constructed illusion unraveling in front of his eyes. His mind couldn't keep up with the speed of it all. Who could he trust now? The people he had thought were trying to protect him, were they really who they said they were? Or was he just another pawn in a game he didn't even know how to play? The investigator stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as if reading Malik's every thought. Look, I don't have time to explain everything, but what I can tell you is this. The CIA woman, the one who's been stirring things up in the courtroom, she's not working for anyone but herself. She's been pulling strings behind the scenes, using the officers to cover up something far more dangerous. And now, she's targeting you. Malik felt a chill creep down his spine. This couldn't be real, could it? He had trusted the woman, believed that she was trying to bring justice to light. But now, according to this investigator, everything he thought he understood was a lie. Was she just manipulating him for some greater purpose? Was he nothing more than a tool in her game? How do I know you're telling the truth? Malik's voice barely rose above a whisper, his throat dry as the words left him. The investigator's eyes locked onto his, unblinking. Because I'm the one who's been tracking her for months. I know what she's planning, and I know that if you stay here, if you stay involved with her, you're going to be caught in the crossfire. People like her don't care who gets hurt as long as they get what they want. The finality in his voice sent a shiver down Malik's back. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to break free of the trap closing in around him. But what if this man was right? What if the woman he had trusted was the real threat all along? For a moment, Malik stood there, torn between two choices. He could walk away, turn his back on everything he had been dragged into, and trust this stranger. Or he could keep pushing forward, believing that the woman had been his ally. Either way, his life had already been changed, and there was no going back. The man stepped closer, his hand reaching for Malik's arm. "You don't have much time," he said, urgency creeping into his voice. "You need to decide now. They're watching you. The cops. The woman. The people in the shadows who you don't even know exist. If you don't move fast, you'll be trapped." Malik's heart pounded in his chest, and the world around him seemed to blur as the enormity of the situation hit him all at once. He was stuck in the middle of a fight he didn't understand, with no clear way out. The stakes had never been higher, and yet, the choice was still his to make. And then, just as he took a hesitant step forward, something else happened. The SUV, which had been parked quietly just moments ago, roared to life. The engine revved, and before Malik could react, the vehicle sped toward him, fast and relentless. The investigator was already moving, grabbing Malik by the arm and pulling him away from the street just as the SUV came barreling down. The screech of tires filled the air as it slammed to a stop just inches from them, and the doors flew open. Malik barely had time to register the figures who emerged from the car. Two men in suits, their faces obscured by dark glasses, their steps quick and deliberate. The man who had claimed to be the federal investigator turned to Malik, his eyes wide with warning. "This is it," he said. "They've found you. It's now or never." The world seemed to freeze in that moment, the tension hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Malik's pulse raced as the men from the SUV advanced, and he knew, without a doubt, that whatever decision he made next would change everything. The men from the SUV approached quickly, their steps deliberate, cutting through the thick tension in the air. Malik's heart pounded as his body tensed, instinctively pulling away from the federal investigator who had been trying to protect him. But before he could make a move, one of the men in the suit stepped forward with an almost eerie calmness. His eyes locked onto Malik's, as though he already knew everything about him. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," the man said, his voice smooth and authoritative. There was no hesitation in his tone, as if they had already won, as if Malik's fate had already been sealed. But the federal investigator wasn't having any of it. He pulled Malik behind him, positioning himself as a barrier between the two groups. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he said, voice low, but filled with warning. "Back off, or we're all going to regret this." The man in the suit only smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a chill through Malik's body. "I think you'll find that you've already lost," he said, stepping even closer, his eyes never leaving Malik. It happened in an instant. The investigator lunged, but the suited men were faster. Before Malik could react, one of them grabbed him, pulling him toward the SUV with a speed that left him breathless. The other man moved to subdue the federal investigator, knocking him to the ground in a swift motion. Malik struggled against the hold, his mind racing. He needed to get free, but there was no way out. They were too powerful, too well-coordinated. The man who had been holding him now pulled out something small and metallic from his jacket pocket, an earpiece. He slipped it into his ear, and for a moment, the world seemed to go still. Malik could hear muffled voices on the other end, urgent and clipped. Whoever was on the other side was making decisions, and it was clear they were pulling the strings behind this entire operation. "Bring him in," the voice on the other end ordered. "It's time to wrap this up." Malik's stomach twisted. This was it. He was about to be taken, and he had no idea where they would take him or what they planned to do once they got him there. His mind reeled as the events of the past few hours blurred together. The woman in the courtroom, the note, the investigator, all of it now felt like a game, and Malik was the pawn. Just as the men started to push him toward the SUV, something unexpected happened. A loud crash echoed through the street, followed by a familiar voice shouting out, "Let him go." Malik's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head, eyes wide in disbelief as Terrell appeared, rushing toward them with a fire in his eyes. He didn't hesitate, charging straight at the suited men, his fists clenched, ready to fight. The man holding Malik loosened his grip for just a moment, distracted by Terrell's sudden arrival. That was all Malik needed. With every ounce of strength he had, he yanked himself free from the man's grasp and bolted toward his brother. "Terrell, get out of here," Malik shouted, but his brother wasn't listening. He kept running, faster now, his focus entirely on the men who had been closing in on them. Malik's heart raced as he joined his brother in the charge, pushing toward the nearest alley. They didn't have much time before the others regrouped. The two men in suits were already recovering, moving with military precision, but for the moment, they had the upper hand. "Malik, where's the investigator?" Terrell demanded, pulling him into the alley and out of the direct line of sight. "What's going on here?" I don't know," Malik said, panting. His head was spinning. "I thought he was here to help, but now I'm not sure who's on my side anymore." Terrell cursed under his breath. "We don't have time to figure this out. We need to move." But as they turned down another street, something changed. The distant sound of sirens began to grow louder. Police? Or someone else? Malik's mind raced again. What if the authorities were already involved? What if these men in suits had already set everything in motion, and this was just the beginning? Just then, another voice echoed from the shadows. "Malik, Terrell, stop." It was the woman. The black woman from the courtroom. She stepped into the dim light of the alleyway, her expression serious, even darker than it had been before. But this time, there was no confusion in her eyes. There was clarity. And something else. Something dangerous. "Do you think you've won?" she asked, her voice low but tinged with a cold finality. "You're too late. The pieces are already in place. You've just made it harder for everyone, including yourselves." Malik's head spun as he processed her words. "What are you talking about? I thought you were on our side. Why did you do all this?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "Because I was never trying to protect you. I was trying to protect the system. You 2-inch, she glanced at Terrell, then back at Malik, "are too close to the truth now. You know too much." Terrell took a step back, his hand reaching for his phone, his knuckles white from the tension. "What is this? What do you want?" "I want you both to understand what's at stake," she said, her voice taking on an almost eerie calmness. "You're not just dealing with corrupt cops or a rogue investigator. You're dealing with a network that spans the highest levels of government, and they won't stop until they've buried everything and everyone who stands in their way." Before either of them could respond, the SUV roared to life once more. The doors opened, and the suited men stepped out again, surrounding the two brothers and the woman. But this time, the situation felt different, more urgent. The woman glanced at the men, and a strange expression crossed her face. "I've made my decision," she said quietly. "You too," she looked at Malik and Terrell. "You'll be left standing. But this ends tonight." In an instant, the suited men reached for their weapons. But then, something completely unexpected happened. The sound of gunfire rang out, echoing down the street, and the men staggered, dropping to the ground one by one. Malik's heart pounded as he looked around, trying to understand what was happening. From the shadows emerged a figure, another man, wearing a suit but moving with unmatched speed and precision. He pulled his gun away, eyes scanning the scene. "Don't move," he said to Malik, his tone sharp, but not unkind. "You're not as in control as you think." And with that, the world around Malik shifted again. Nothing was as it seemed, and just when he thought he understood the game, the rules changed one final time. Malik's breath caught in his throat as the man in the suit slowly approached, the gun still in his hand but lowered now, not pointed at anyone. He seemed like he was in control of everything, but for a split second, Malik wondered if this was just another layer to the puzzle, another twist in a game he could never fully understand. "Who are you?" Terrell demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Who the hell are all these people? What's going on?" The suited man didn't respond right away. He glanced at the woman, who stood just behind Malik and Terrell, her expression unreadable. Then, in one fluid motion, he holstered his gun and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, plain envelope. He handed it to Malik without a word. Malik took it, his hand still trembling. Inside was a single sheet of paper, plain and unmarked, save for one line of text. "Everything you need to know is in your hands now." Malik stared at the paper, confused. He looked up at the man, his mind still trying to make sense of the chaos. "What does this mean?" Malik asked, but the man didn't answer. Instead, he took a step back and nodded to the woman. "It's time," she said quietly. "The game is over." And just like that, the remaining tension in the air seemed to dissipate. The suited men who had been chasing them were either unconscious or retreating, their roles now finished in this twisted saga. The woman stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Malik. "I've been trying to protect you," she said, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. "Not from the police. Not from the system. But from yourself." Malik frowned, still not fully understanding. "From myself? What does that even mean?" She sighed and looked away for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "You were always meant to play a part in something bigger. But you weren't supposed to know about it. This entire situation, the note, the court case, the investigation, it was all orchestrated. The moment you stepped into that courtroom, you became a key player in a much larger operation." Terrell looked at her, disbelief still clouding his face. "So, everything was planned?" The woman nodded. "Yes. Every move. You weren't the first, and you won't be the last. There are people who need to keep the system running smoothly. And for that, they need pawns, people like you, who are just close enough to the truth to be dangerous." "But we never wanted any of this," Malik protested, feeling the anger rise in him. "We just got caught up in something we didn't even understand." "I know," she replied, her expression softening. "But the truth was never meant for you to uncover. And now you've seen too much. The envelope, it's your choice. You can walk away, forget all of this, or you can use it to bring down the people who are pulling the strings." Malik's mind raced. Everything was suddenly clearer, but at the same time, even more complicated. The idea that he could walk away, leave it all behind, was tempting. But the injustice, the corruption he had witnessed, he couldn't ignore it. It had to be stopped, even if he didn't know how. "What's in the envelope?" he asked, his voice shaking now with uncertainty. The weight of the decision was overwhelming. Should he take the risk, dive deeper into a world he wasn't prepared for, or leave it all behind and try to find some sense of normality? The woman didn't answer directly. Instead, she gave him a long, hard look. "That envelope contains information about every person involved in this, the cops, the investigators, even those in power behind the scenes. If you decide to use it, you'll be going up against a machine that's been running for years. And they won't hesitate to make you disappear if they feel threatened." Malik swallowed hard, his thoughts racing. He thought about the people who had been hurt by this system, about the officers who had been complicit in crimes, about the corruption that had poisoned everything around him. How could he just walk away from that? "Is there anyone we can trust?" Terrell asked quietly, his voice holding a note of fear. The woman hesitated before answering. "There are always a few. But you'll need to decide who they are very carefully. Trust is a fragile thing in this world." Malik took a deep breath. He glanced at Terrell, seeing the same conflict in his brother's eyes. They had already come too far. There was no turning back now. "I don't know if I'm ready," Malik admitted, his voice thick with emotion. but I know I can't walk away. Not after everything that's happened. Terrell nodded in agreement. I've got your back, no matter what. We'll figure it out together. The woman gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging their decision. Good. Just remember, this won't be easy. There are forces far bigger than you, than any of us, but the truth is a weapon. Use it wisely. As the woman began to turn away, the suited man who had intervened earlier spoke for the first time. You've made your choice, Malik. Now it's time to follow through. Malik held the envelope tightly in his hands. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't running away. He wasn't hiding in the shadows of someone else's game. He had the power to shape his own future and the future of the people who had been left behind. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The darkness wasn't gone. In fact, it was only just beginning. But at least now, Malik had a choice. He could choose to fight. And for the first time, he felt like he was ready. As the woman and the suited men disappeared into the night, Malik stood there with Terrell, both of them looking at the envelope. It was a simple piece of paper, but it held so much. It was the key to everything they had been through, everything that had brought them to this point. We'll make this right, Malik said quietly, his voice firm. Terrell smiled, his arm resting on his brother's shoulder. Yeah, we will. And with that, they turned and walked away, ready to face whatever came next.